In today's digital age, how do we draw the line between documenting public information and, well, potentially putting people in real danger?
Yeah, it's a really complex question, isn't it? And it's pretty much at the heart of what we're digging into today.
Absolutely. We're dissecting the controversial world of Traplow Ross. He's this British content creator, built a massive YouTube following, basically by compiling details about the lives and alleged rivalries of hip-hop artists.
Especially within the Chicago drill scene. You know, that raw hip-hop subgenre known for lyrics detailing street life. It's intense stuff.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We want to unpack these central questions around Traplow Ross. Is he a journalist, just organizing information? Or is he, as many accuse him, a dry snitch?
Right, someone whose work might create these unintended or maybe even intended real-world consequences.
Exactly. We're going to explore how his unique brand of, open source storytelling impacts everyone from superstars down to lesser-known artists, and why these conversations are, frankly, way more layered than they first look.
We've gathered analyses of his work, specific examples of backlash from artists and communities, and discussions on the whole ethical side of his methods.
It really is a fascinating case study in the power of digital narrative.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. Who exactly is Traplow Ross? It feels important to stress he's a British content creator.
Yeah, grew up in Bognor Regis, England, built his entire career from overseas before he ever actually visited the U.S. or the communities he talks so much about.
And that distance, that geographical and cultural gap, it's kind of key to understanding some of the criticism, isn't it?
It really is. Now, his method, that's his signature. These marathon-length YouTube videos, sometimes hours long.
Hours, yeah.
And what he does is he stitches together all these public breadcrumbs, court filings, song lyrics, social media posts, tweets, Reddit threads.
Anything he can find online,
Yeah,
basically.
pretty much. It's an assembly job, right? Taking these fragmented bits of info that are technically already out there. Right.
And his content, it often focuses on some very prominent and often controversial figures.
Yeah, names like King Von, obviously a huge figure in drill whose legacy is still debated after his death.
Mm.
Then there's Lil Durk, another major Chicago drill artist. He covers the Jacksonville scene, too. And big names like NBA Youngboy.
He tends to frame it all as, true crime-adjacent narratives, which almost by definition is going to stir up controversy.
Right. And what's really striking is how assembling all this, seemingly unconnected public info creates these incredibly neat timelines, alleged timelines, we should say.
Yeah, good point. Alleged timelines of beefs, shootings, conspiracies.
He takes all these scattered data points and weaves them into this coherent, dramatic story. It feels very definitive to his millions of viewers.
And that brings us smack bang into the main accusation, dry snitching.
Right. Now, snitching in the traditional street sense or criminological sense usually means cooperating directly with police, giving them information.
But dry snitching, when people talk about Traplow Ross, it's different. It's the accusation that how he packages all this public info into crime narratives.
Yeah.
It feels like he's packaging allegations for prosecutors.
Or even just for the court of public opinion, even if there's zero formal cooperation with the police involved.
It's a really critical distinction.
And Traplow Ross himself, he pushes back hard on this. He defends his work staunchly.
What does he say?
He repeatedly says he only compiles public information. He argues he doesn't give police anything they couldn't find themselves with a bit of digging. He calls it research-heavy storytelling.
So he sees himself more like a historian or a documentarian.
Exactly. He really rejects that snitch label.
But then there's this controversial stance he took, which kind of poured gasoline on the fire, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. He publicly said that the hip-hop norm of being, quote, willing to murder but not snitch seems mind-boggling to him.
Wow. Okay. You can see how that statement, coming from an outsider, would just amplify the backlash he gets from street culture circles.
Absolutely. For many, it just shows a fundamental lack of understanding, maybe even disrespect.
And this really gets to the core tension, right? Critics argue that just because information is public doesn't mean it's harmless.
Precisely. When you have an influencer with millions of views carefully curating and connecting names, events, photos, putting it all together in this slick narrative package.
It absolutely can feel like you're helping out law enforcement. Or even worse, helping out street rivals.
Yeah. Even if the videos themselves wouldn't hold up as evidence in court, the perception he creates, the potential impact on someone's actual life, that's incredibly real.
And the clearest, maybe most explosive example of this whole tension was around his King Von documentary.
Oh, definitely. King Von, Rap's first serial killer. Originally, it was like 4 hours long.
4 hours.
Yeah, and it claimed to link Von to around 10 murders, which we have to keep stressing. King Von was never convicted of any of these alleged crimes.
Right, crucial point.
And this is where the platform's power just became undeniable. In April 2023, YouTube actually took the video down.
That was a huge deal, amidst all the backlash.
Massive. But then it was later put back up in an edited, slightly shorter version. About 3.5 hours, I think.
So that whole cycle, the viral release, the takedown, the edited return, it really highlighted something important about how content works now, doesn't it?
It really did. It showed how these open source narratives can spread like wildfire and, feel like actual evidence to huge audiences.
And potentially even influence juries down the line, whether or not they meet any kind of formal courtroom standard for snitching.
Exactly. And the critiques weren't just about the ethics. They dug into the facts, too.
People questioned the accuracy.
Yeah, communities in Chicago, drill forums online, they quickly started pointing out what they saw as errors, disputing specific claims about who was responsible for what, calling parts of it just speculation.
So it wasn't like formal fact-checking, but detailed pushback from people who felt they knew the scene better.
Right, basically arguing his timelines mixed up rumor with actual corroborated fact.
And this backlash wasn't just online forums, right? Industry figures spoke out, too.
Oh, yeah. You had veteran rappers like Boosie and interviewers like DJ Vlad publicly criticizing the Von doc.
What was their main concern?
They were warning that this kind of content could genuinely get people hurt or unfairly sway prosecutors and jurors, really underscoring the real-world stakes involved.
Which brings us to, I think, a really crucial point. The impact of Traplore Ross's work on living, often lesser-known drill rappers.
Yes. Because while the King Von story was huge, the real ethical weight and that persistent dry snitching accusation, it feels even heavier for active artists, especially those who don't have that, posthumous distance or the protective bubble of superstardom.
Right, they're much more vulnerable.
Exactly. For a lot of these underground rappers, a Traplore Ross video isn't just some piece of entertainment online. It can fundamentally shape their reputation and really amplify their risks.
Oh, so?
Well, his content can effectively freeze them into a public persona, right, as a shooter or a snitch, often based on flimsy rumors. And they don't have the safety net, the fame, the money, the high-powered legal teams.
So it creates this stark power imbalance. The content creator's digital narrative potentially holding more sway over their life than their own reality.
Pretty much. Largely because of the massive reach of platforms like YouTube. It gives his version of the story incredible weight.
We saw this really clearly with Tay Savage from Chicago, didn't we?
Yeah, that was a vivid example. Ross did one of his documentary-style breakdowns on him.
And Tay Savage responded.
He confronted Ross online, directly accused him of basically being the feds and making stuff up, fabricating details.
So even though Ross would argue it's all public info,
Yeah.
the artist felt it put a target on his back.
Precisely. And it's not just him. Ross has spotlighted other artists like Rico Reckless, various Brick Squad affiliates.
And often reacts similarly.
Yeah, you see them posting online, pushing back against outsiders they say are lying, or twisting their reputations just for YouTube views. For many of these guys who aren't global stars, a TLR doc might be the most widely seen thing about them.
Which gives Ross just disproportionate power over how they're perceived.
Absolutely.
And it's not just a U.S. thing either, is it? He covered the UK drill scene, too.
Right. His expose on Central C, who's a really popular UK artist, that got slammed hard as well.
Same kind of criticism. Biased, misleading.
Yeah, fans, industry insiders, they accused him of selectively arranging facts just to fit this pre-packaged narrative he wanted to tell, this gangster versus fake storyline.
So again, raising serious questions about his accuracy, his honesty, even when covering artists geographically closer to home for him.
Exactly. And the artists themselves, they are responding. You mentioned NBA Youngboy earlier.
Right. His lyric, real gangster or a fake killer, on the track. Testimony.
Yeah, that was widely seen as a direct shot back at Traplore Ross's framing. It shows how targeted these artists feel by these narratives and how they're using their own art to fight back.
So beyond the accuracy questions, the criticism really deepens into these accusations of cultural exploitation.
Yes. Which brings us back to his background. As we said, a white British creator from Bognor Regis with no lived experience in the American street cultures or hip-hop communities he covers.
And the critique there is the culture vulture label.
Exactly. The core accusation is that he mines Black American urban traumas, real violence, real tragedy for dramatic YouTube content, and ultimately, for profit.
Treating these really profound human experiences almost like abstract source material.
That's the charge. Outlets like Complex have described his work as sensationalist, fetishizing street life in a way that feels exploitative, not really empathetic or informed.
And you see that online, too.
Oh yeah, Reddit users, forum posters, directly accusing him of exploitation. One called him the worst type of culture vulture, specifically for just repackaging stuff people were already talking about in those forums.
And that cultural and geographical distance we mentioned earlier, it feels critical here.
It really does. It arguably allows him to profit from these narratives about neighborhoods and communities he didn't grow up in without facing the same kind of accountability or having the same perspective as someone from there.
It raises this big question, doesn't it? Does just being able to compile public data give you the ethical green light to narrate someone else's trauma from such a distance?
Especially when that distance kind of insulates you from the real-world fallout. He's essentially profiting from stories where he has no personal stake, no lived experience.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. The core tension we've been exploring, it seems to be this. There's no credible evidence, none, that Traplore Ross formally collaborates with police.
Right, no actual snitching in the traditional sense.
But his careful packaging of public information into these slick, easy-to-digest crime narratives, it undeniably shapes how millions of people perceive these artists and events.
Which directly fuels that dry snitching accusation. It feels like collaboration, even if it isn't technically.
So while he might present himself as, a hip-hop historian, his background, his methods, the real impact of his work, it invites really strong criticism, both on factual accuracy and on cultural exploitation.
Especially for those more vulnerable, living artists whose lives are directly impacted by these narratives he creates.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. In this era where information is everywhere, so easily repackaged, what responsibility do content creators actually bear for the real-world consequences of the stories they tell?
Yeah, especially when they're covering active conflicts, sensitive situations, and communities so far removed from their own lived experience. What does it really mean for public information to cross the line and become dangerous information?